Hello, thanks for joining me for another time of Bible study. Today we're going to look at Genesis chapter 16 and 17, so it might be a little longer than usual. So let's get started. Genesis chapter 16 verses 1 through 3. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. It seems that both Abram and Sarai had gotten more than a little impatient with God's timing here. They tried to reinterpret the promise of God according to the customs of the land. It was normal practice for a childless couple to have children through their servants, through their maidservants. Here, Hagar becomes that very servant. We should take note that the existence of an acceptable custom certainly doesn't make it right in the eyes of God. There are plenty of things in our nation today, for instance, that's perfectly legal and accepted by the masses that should be off limits to anyone who's a Christian. We see a little of the faith waning from this couple, particularly Abram here. He should have known better. The couple had forgotten that God's promise was specific and it was explicitly spelled out for them both. Abram would have an heir born naturally and with his wife, Sarai. This hero in the faith agrees far too easily to this arrangement and this, misguided plan. Verses 4 through 6 says, "He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, 'You were responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now she knows she's pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me.' 'Your servant is in your hands,' Abram said. 'Do with her whatever you think best.' Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her." What Sarai meant to build was happening. She was wanting to build Abram's family for him, and the plan had backfired. Hagar became pregnant, and now she held it over her mistress's head. There's little doubt that she despised her mistress for putting her in this situation in the first place. Sarai couldn't blame herself for this trouble, so she blamed her husband. Of course, they were both to blame in this predicament. As far as Sarai was concerned, the continuing presence of Hagar and the coming child would only make matters worse and threaten her position of authority in the family. The easiest answer to their problem was to allow Sarai to do whatever she wanted to this servant of hers. So Sarai began to mistreat her. Slaves were essentially property, and there was no law really protecting Hagar from brutality. The only thing that Hagar knew was to flee from the abuse. Any of us would more than likely do the same thing, put in her position. She was an innocent pawn in this situation. Now she finds herself running from her master, though she had done nothing wrong. I want us to notice in the next verse how God treats Hagar. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. So Hagar gets as far as the wilderness on the way to Shur, near the Egyptian border today. It's understandable that She would want to return to her homeland in this given situation, be among family and friends. And it says the angel of the Lord found Hagar. Of course, he knew exactly where she was the whole time and didn't need to ask her any questions for that matter. He's omnipotent, he's omnipresent, and he knows everything. He had witnessed the whole thing. He knew the whole situation all too well, but he interacts with this escaped servant and gets her to tell him exactly what's going on. Verses 9 and 10 says, Then the angel of the Lord told her, Go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord seems to point to what many or most people believe, the pre-incarnate Jesus himself, the angel of the Lord. His character, deeds, and his power confirm this. He instructs Hagar to go back to her mistress and submit to her. Life wouldn't be easy, but this would be the best place for her and for the child for the moment. With this recommendation also comes a blessing. Her descendants would be too numerous to count. It's ironic that the Lord gives much the same promise to her as he had given to Abram. Now verses 11 through 14 says, The angel of the Lord also said to her, You're now with child, and you will have son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility towards all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. The Lord not only recommends her to return back to Abram and Sarai, but he also names the child she was going to bear. His name would be Ishmael, meaning God hears. His name no doubt served to remind Hagar of his special intervention on her behalf. Ishmael will be the first unborn child named by God, but he isn't the last, for he also named Isaac as well as John the Baptist and Jesus. The Lord also fills her in on what kind of character this boy will have. He will be a handful for sure. He will be untamable, and he'll be a Bedouin, someone who roams through the land. Verses 15 and 16 says, So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave him the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. Abram's firstborn son here, 11 years had now passed since God had promised him an heir, but his promise was still unfulfilled to this point. This child wouldn't not be his heir that God was promised him. Now let's go on to chapter 17, verses 1 through 3. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But after the birth of Ishmael, there is no word from the Lord for some 13 years. Was this a test of Abram's faith? Was it because Abram's impatience on the Lord's timing in this whole situation with Abram or Ishmael? Here the term God Almighty comes from the Hebrew word El Shaddai. It is closely connected to the identification of God as all-powerful. He is omnipotent. It is also connected to promise. God is the God of promise to Abram, and He's powerful enough to bring any promise true. Abram is awestruck in the presence of God, so he falls face down on the ground before Him. And God once again speaks to this man. In verses 4 and 5 it says, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." God reaffirms the promise to Abram. God's blessing and promise is not contingent upon the capabilities or strength or power of Abram, but on the faithfulness of God to His covenant, His promise with this man. He goes on to change Abram's name to Abraham. While Abram means exalted father, Abraham means father of the multitude. His new name would be a daily reminder of God's covenant promise to him. Verses 6 through 8 says, "I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God." These verses simply restate the covenant that God had already made with Abram, or Abraham now. He would have countless descendants, and future generations would come into the land of Canaan, and they would possess it. It would be theirs. God will be true to His promises, and now Abraham and his descendants would also have their part in this covenant relationship. Verses 9 through 14. "Then God said to Abraham, As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring. Whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." Abraham's part in the covenant was to pass on the adherence of this thing called circumcision. All male children 8 days old were to be circumcised, whether it was a natural born child or one born in his household or one bought. All the members of this family community or covenant family or covenant community would follow the sign of faith to God. It seems they would leave the faith part out later on. This is why the Apostle Paul would write, "Circumcision has no value if you observe the law, but if you break the law, you have become as though you have not been circumcised. If those who are not circumcised keeps the law's requirements, will they not be regarded as though they were circumcised? The one who is not circumcised physically and yet obeys the law will condemn you who, even though you have the written code and circumcision, are a lawbreaker. A man is not a Jew if he is only one outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a man is a Jew if he is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a man's praise is not from man, but from God. We often think that circumcision was unique to the human nation, or the Hebrew nation, but this isn't so. There are several of the ites in the land of Canaan right now, during the time of this man Abraham, that practiced circumcision, as well as the Egyptians. The Philistines were the exceptions, of course, but what made circumcision so unique in this situation was the covenant relationship and faith in the one true God. Verses 15 and 16 says, God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer called Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. So God not only changed the name of Abram to Abraham, he did so for Sarah. Sarai became Sarah. And her name Sarai meant my princess. Sarah means a princess. He promised her a special blessing. She would become the mother of a son, and this son would become the father of many nations. Verse 17 says, Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? It seems odd that a man of great faith would laugh and wonder to himself about the impossibility of God's promise to him. We have to wonder then if it was joy or was it doubt that motivated his laughter. We really don't know for sure, but it certainly seems that his faith may be a little thin at the age of 99, especially concerning this promise, again, of a child. Verses 18 through 21. And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. Was Abraham trying to steer God Almighty to a different stance, a more realistic path that he mentioned Ishmael here? It seems so, considering the Lord's response. God tells him again that Sarah will indeed have a son the natural way. They will name him Isaac, meaning he laughs. Every time Abraham would call his son Isaac, it would remind him of his doubt in response to the Lord's promise. It would be through Isaac that all of the promises, covenant promises, would come true. Ishmael would not be left out of God's blessings. His descendants would be many as well. He will be the father of 12 rulers and would become a great nation. And if the Arabs are in fact the descendants of Ishmael, which we believe to be so, we can appreciate the fullness of God's promises here. Even though Ishmael would become a great nation, he would not be the child of promise. Isaac would be the one that would be the one who continued God's covenant here, the recipient of God's covenant blessings. Abraham's wait for the son of promise was almost over. In another year, this long-awaited son would arrive. Now, finally, verses 22 through 27. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all those born in his household or bought with his money, every male in the household, and circumcised them as God told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that same day, and every male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. Abraham's faith is strengthened, and he immediately acts upon the Lord's command of circumcision. Abraham's experiences should teach us many things, including the power of God to come through on His purposes, on His promises, as well as the importance of our own faith in God. There is no natural law or barrier in place that will keep the Lord from coming through on His promises, even unbelievable ones. A miracle cannot be explained or analyzed, but has to be attributed to the power of God to fulfill His purposes and His plans. We are asked to believe and to place our faith in the one true God. He is the God of great promises as well as great blessings. May God bless you and keep you till we meet again here for our next chapter in the book of Genesis.